At the end of 1954, Darryl F. Zanuck, the head of 20th Century Fox, called Marilyn Monroe and said, "If you don't sign this contract, you'll never work in this industry again." Marilyn hung up the phone and didn't answer. 8 weeks later, those same studio executives were flying to Manhattan begging Marilyn, because in those 8 weeks, everything had changed. She had formed her own production company called Marilyn Monroe Productions, moved to New York, and launched Hollywood's biggest rebellion. But the real bombshell was her meeting with Lee Strasberg. Strasberg, the most respected acting teacher of the time and leader of the Actors Studio, told Marilyn, "You have tremendous talent inside you, but Hollywood killed it. If you want to be a real actress, you need to stay here." And Marilyn stayed. She lived in Manhattan for months, went to the Actors Studio every day, learned method acting. During this time, she lost millions of dollars because she wasn't making films. Her friends called her crazy. Joe DiMaggio told her to come back. Arthur Miller supported her, but was waiting for them to get married, and Paula Strasberg was beginning to enter every moment of Marilyn's daily life. Marilyn was now living with one decision: either she would become a real actress or she would be nothing. But the price of that decision would be much heavier than she imagined. Because while the Actors Studio was teaching Marilyn acting, it was also dragging her into a war with herself, and that war would end with her death 7 years later. If this story moves you and you want to learn more truths about Hollywood's dark side, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Every week we bring you unknown stories about Marilyn Monroe and Golden Age Hollywood. Manhattan was cold in January 1955, but for Marilyn Monroe it was much warmer than Los Angeles, because for the first time in her life, no one was telling her what to do. For 7 years, 20th Century Fox had told her which films to be in, how to dress, which parties to attend, even who to be friends with. That's how contracts worked back then. The studio system bought you and you became their property. Marilyn called it a golden cage. From the outside, everyone saw wealth and fame, but from the inside, Marilyn felt like a slave. And at the end of 1954, she made a decision. Either she would be free or she would be nothing. There was a photographer named Milton Greene, and he was offering Marilyn a completely different life. Greene said, "Marilyn, you can start your own production company. You decide which films you'll be in. You decide which directors you'll work with. If you want Hollywood to take you seriously, you need to stop playing their game." This was a radical idea because in the 1950s, female stars didn't have their own production companies. Men did things like that. But Marilyn was ready to take the risk. She partnered with Greene and officially founded Marilyn Monroe Productions. The studio executives went crazy. Darryl Zanuck was shouting on the phone, "You're finished, Marilyn. You'll never work in this industry again." But Marilyn wasn't listening anymore. Something else was happening at the same time. Her marriage to Joe DiMaggio had collapsed. DiMaggio wanted Marilyn to be just a housewife. She should cook at home every day, entertain guests, and support his baseball career. But Marilyn rebelled against this. She wanted a career too. She wanted respect too. And most importantly, she wanted to be recognized as a serious artist too. DiMaggio couldn't understand this. The 9-month marriage ended in divorce, and Marilyn found herself alone in New York. But she wasn't lonely. Milton Greene and his wife Amy invited Marilyn to their home in Connecticut. Marilyn stayed there, made plans, and began rebuilding her life. And during this process, she heard a name: Lee Strasberg. When Marilyn first saw Lee Strasberg, she was scared, because Strasberg was nothing like the people in Hollywood. Studio executives always tried to entertain her, look pleasant, make her smile. But Strasberg wasn't even looking at her. On her first day at the Actors Studio, Marilyn sat in the back row and hoped no one would recognize her. She had a scarf on her head, wore thick-framed glasses, had no makeup. But one of the actors inside recognized her and started whispering, "What is Marilyn Monroe doing here?" Strasberg heard this and said sharply, "This is the Actors Studio. Fame means nothing here. Here there is only acting." Marilyn relaxed at that moment because for the first time someone was looking at her, not because of her fame, but because of her acting. What Strasberg taught was the method acting system, and this was completely different from the traditional acting techniques used in Hollywood. In Hollywood, they would tell you to memorize lines, teach you how to look at the camera, show you how to stand on stage, But method acting told you this: don't play the character from the outside, live it from the inside. Use the pains, joys, traumas from your own past and bring them to the stage. Strasberg would say to his students, if an actor doesn't have the courage to open their own soul, they can never be great. This was both exciting and frightening for Marilyn, because opening her own soul meant facing her past, and Marilyn's past was very dark. But Strasberg had said something else. Marilyn, you have one of the greatest natural talents I've seen in this industry, but Hollywood used you and threw your talent in the trash. If you stay here, I can teach you real acting. Those words changed Marilyn's life. For the first time, someone was telling her not just that she was beautiful, but that she was talented. For the first time, someone valued her not for her fame, but for her art. And Marilyn decided at that moment she would stay at the actor's studio, no matter how hard it was. Lee Strasberg's wife, Paula Strasberg, entered Marilyn's life in a different way. Paula was also a former actress and now taught at the actor's studio. When she first met Marilyn, Paula told her, "You're very shy, Marilyn. You can shine on stage, but in real life you try to hide yourself." This was true. Marilyn had always been a shy person. She could radiate confidence in front of the camera, but when the camera turned off, she felt very small. Paula saw this and began giving Marilyn private lessons. These private lessons took place at the Strasbergs' home. Lee was there sometimes, but most of the time Paula and Marilyn worked alone. Paula wanted Marilyn to tell her about her past, her childhood, her mother, the years she spent in the orphanage. At first, Marilyn didn't want to talk because these memories were too painful, but Paula insisted, "Marilyn, these pains are the raw material of your acting. If you learn to use them, no actor can reach your level." And slowly Marilyn began to open up. In each session, Paula would choose a scene and ask Marilyn to connect that scene with a moment from her own life. For example, if there was a role of a girl fighting with her mother, Paula would ask, "Marilyn, what was your worst moment with your mother?" Marilyn would remember that moment, return to that feeling, and then perform the scene. This was an incredibly exhausting process. Sometimes after a 4-hour lesson, Marilyn would come out crying, but Paula would tell her, "This pain is temporary, Marilyn, but the acting you learn will stay with you forever." And Marilyn believed, but something else was happening. Paula was becoming not just Marilyn's acting teacher, but almost a mother figure in her life. Marilyn's mother, Gladys, had been in a mental hospital for years, and Marilyn could see her very rarely. Now Paula was giving Marilyn the attention her mother couldn't give. She told her what to eat, suggested how to dress, even recommended which books to read. Marilyn seemed to love this because for the first time in her life, someone was really paying attention to her. But this dependency would lead to big problems later, because Paula's influence on Marilyn became so strong that Marilyn could no longer make any decision without Paula, and this would cause major conflicts on Hollywood sets. The method acting classes at the actor's studio weren't ordinary acting classes. This place was like a kind of therapy session. Before actors performed their roles on stage, they recalled traumatic moments from their own past. Lee Strasberg called this the effective memory technique, emotional memory. The idea was this: if you're playing a crying character on stage, it's not enough to just fake tears. You have to really cry. And to really cry, you have to remember a moment in your own life that made you cry. This was very difficult for Marilyn, because she had many moments to cry about: being abandoned by her mother, the years in the orphanage, the abuse she experienced in foster families, the humiliations she experienced in Hollywood. But Strasberg told her, "Marilyn, these memories don't make you weak, they make you strong, because you lived through them and survived. Now you can turn them into art." Marilyn tried this. One day she went on stage at the actor's studio and did a scene from a Clifford Odets play. On stage she played a woman, and that woman was having the worst day of her life. When Marilyn did that scene, she remembered her own worst days. Real tears flowed from her eyes, her voice trembled, and when the scene ended, everyone in the studio stood up and applauded. Lee Strasberg wiped his eyes and said, "That's real acting, Marilyn. You can do this." But this success also came at a great cost to Marilyn, because after each scene work, she felt emotionally exhausted. Reliving the pains from her own past over and over was wearing her down psychologically, and this showed its effect not only in the studio, but also in her daily life. Sleep problems began, her appetite decreased, and an old habit returned, sleeping pills. Marilyn had been using sleeping pills since the late 1940s because she couldn't sleep. Now the intense emotional work at the actor's studio made this problem even worse. At night she would lie in bed for hours awake, thinking about her past and crying. In the mornings she would wake up tired, but still go to the studio, because Marilyn believed in one thing: you couldn't become a great actor without suffering, and she wanted to be a great actor. While working at the actor's studio, Marilyn met another teacher, Constance Collier. Collier was an elderly English actress and a legend from Hollywood's golden age. She was born in 1880, so when Marilyn met her she was 75 years old, but Collier still taught acting classes, and she taught her students this: acting isn't just emotion, it also requires craft. This was a bit different from Lee Strasberg's approach. Strasberg focused only on emotion, but Collier also emphasized technical skill, voice control, breathing exercises, body language, stage movement. Collier taught these to Marilyn. Marilyn would go to Collier's apartment in Manhattan and take private lessons there. Collier would have her read passages from classical theater works, Shakespeare, Chekhov, Ibsen. At first Marilyn struggled with these because these writers' language was very heavy, but Collier was patient. She would tell her, "Marilyn, you have a beautiful voice, but you need to learn to control it. Right now your voice fluctuates with your emotions, but you should be able to direct it as you wish." And Marilyn worked. For weeks she stood in Collier's living room and read Shakespeare sonnets. At first it felt strange because she had never done anything like this in Hollywood, but gradually her voice became stronger, her control increased, and Marilyn realized that acting wasn't just about emotion. Technique was important too. Collier taught her one more thing: grace. In Hollywood, Marilyn always had to be sexy. Her way of walking, her way of laughing, everything emphasized sexiness. But Collier told her, "Marilyn, don't settle for just being sexy. You can also be graceful. A woman can be both strong and graceful." And Marilyn tried this. She changed her walk, changed her posture, and she noticed something interesting. Grace actually gave more power, because now she didn't have to be just men's fantasy. She could display her own power, her own grace. This was a revolutionary understanding for Marilyn. At the beginning of 1956, Lee Strasberg made Marilyn an offer. "Would you like to do a performance on the actor's studio stage?" This was a great opportunity because the actor's studio stage was only open to students, and performing here meant being accepted as a serious actor. Marilyn was excited but also very scared, because this stage was very different from Hollywood sets. In Hollywood, the director would tell you what to do, there would be camera shots, everything could be fixed in editing. But at the actor's studio, she would give a live performance. There was no right to make mistakes, and in the audience would be some of the best actors of the time like Marlon Brando and James Dean. Could Marilyn handle this pressure? The first performance date was set. Marilyn began preparing. She chose a scene from Eugene O'Neill's play Anna Christie. This play was about a prostitute's story, and Marilyn found this role very close to herself, because in Hollywood she also felt like a commodity of sorts. But when the performance day came, Marilyn couldn't go on stage. She was too scared. Lee Strasberg was understanding and said, "It's okay, Marilyn, you'll do it when you're ready." A second date was set. The same thing happened again. Marilyn rehearsed, prepared, but at the last minute couldn't go on. They tried a third time. Again it didn't happen. A fourth time, failed again. Some students at the actor's studio started whispering, "Does Marilyn Monroe really want to be an actor, or is she just trying to get attention?" These rumors reached Marilyn's ears and made her even more anxious. But Paula Strasberg supported Marilyn every day. She told her, "Marilyn, you can do this. Just go on stage and forget everything we've prepared for you. Just feel, just be." And finally, on the fifth attempt, something changed. When Marilyn woke up in the morning, she felt different. She wasn't scared anymore. She was going on stage no matter what. When she came to the actor's studio that day, Lee Strasberg looked at her and smiled. "You're ready today," he said. Marilyn nodded. The stage lights came on. Marilyn walked onto the stage. Dozens of actors sat in the audience. Marlon Brando was in the front row. Kim Stanley, Eli Wallach, Ben Gazzara were all there. Marilyn took a deep breath and transformed into the Anna Christie character on stage. When she said her first lines, her voice trembled. But then something happened. The method acting Strasberg had taught kicked in. Marilyn wasn't Marilyn anymore. She was Anna Christie. The scene lasted 15 minutes. Marilyn didn't hesitate once. Tears came because the scene was emotional, but these were real tears. When the scene ended, there was silence. 3 seconds, 5 seconds. Then Marlon Brando stood up and started applauding. After him, everyone stood up. The applause lasted 5 minutes. Marilyn stood on stage and couldn't believe it. Lee Strasberg was wiping his eyes. Paula Strasberg ran onto the stage and hugged Marilyn. And at that moment, Marilyn knew she had become a real actress. After this success at the Actors Studio, Hollywood started wanting Marilyn again. A new contract was signed with 20th Century Fox, and this time the terms were very different. Marilyn could now decide for herself which films she would be in. She would have a say in choosing directors, and most importantly, her salary had quadrupled. This was a great victory, but Marilyn knew the real battle was just beginning, because she was returning to Hollywood, but she wasn't the same anymore. She had learned method acting, she had worked to be a serious actress. Now she had to prove this on Hollywood sets. Her first film was Bus Stop, and Paula Strasberg was there too. Marilyn no longer worked without Paula. Paula came to every film as Marilyn's personal acting coach and was with Marilyn on sets. This drove directors crazy, because when the director told Marilyn something, Marilyn would look at Paula and wait for Paula's approval. If Paula nodded, Marilyn did it, but if Paula didn't nod, Marilyn refused. Director Joshua Logan said in an interview, Marilyn was incredibly talented, but she couldn't do anything without Paula Strasberg. This was very strange because Marilyn was magnificent when she went on stage, but she couldn't trust herself without Paula. Paula's presence on sets led to major controversies. Some actors complained, Paula is constantly whispering to Marilyn, this disrupts our concentration. Some directors tried to kick Paula off the set, but Marilyn didn't allow it. She had put a clause in her contract. Paula Strasberg would always be on set. Hollywood was shocked because no actor had ever done anything like this before, but Marilyn didn't care. Paula gave her confidence, Paula understood her, Paula loved her, and there were very few people in Marilyn's life who really loved her. Another important name who entered Marilyn's life during the Actors Studio period was Arthur Miller. Miller was one of the most famous playwrights of the time. He had written works like Death of a Salesman and The Crucible, and was highly respected on Broadway. Marilyn and Miller had met in the early 1950s, but Miller was married at the time. But in 1955, Miller got divorced and his relationship with Marilyn resumed. They got married in 1956. This marriage was very important for Marilyn because Miller was an intellectual man. Marilyn had always wanted to be seen as a serious person, and now she was married to one of America's most respected writers. This gave her a kind of authority. She was no longer just the blonde bombshell, she was the serious writer's wife. But the marriage was difficult from the start. Miller was a very quiet and introverted man. Marilyn was emotional and needy. Miller needed silence to write. Marilyn constantly needed attention, and this incompatibility slowly wore down the marriage. Miller wrote a screenplay called The Misfits for Marilyn. This was one of Marilyn's dreams because her husband was writing a special role for her. But the film shoot was a disaster. The relationship between Marilyn and Miller had deteriorated badly, and they weren't talking to each other anymore. There were big fights on set. Marilyn was constantly late, forgetting her lines. Paula Strasberg was there again interfering with the director. The film was completed, but the marriage wasn't. They divorced in 1961, and once again Marilyn found herself alone. The Actors Studio had taught her acting, but it couldn't teach her happiness. Method acting gave Marilyn great acting skills, but it also destroyed her psychologically, because method acting tells you, use your own traumas. But every time you use those traumas, you relive them. And every time Marilyn made a film, she was reliving the pains from her own past over and over. This wasn't sustainable. Her acting was getting better and better, but her psychological health was getting worse and worse. In the late 1950s, Marilyn began receiving psychiatric treatment. A psychoanalyst named Dr. Ralph Greenson gave her weekly sessions. Greenson talked about Marilyn's childhood traumas, her mother's mental illness, the abuse in Hollywood. But an interesting thing was happening. Greenson, like method acting, was also asking Marilyn to remember her past, just like Lee Strasberg. And now Marilyn was realizing this. Everywhere she was being told to remember her past. In acting classes, in therapy sessions, in private lessons with Paula Strasberg, she constantly had to go back to her past, and this was exhausting her. Sleeping pill use reached dangerous levels. Marilyn was now taking several pills every night and sometimes overdosing. She had been hospitalized several times. Her friends were worried, but no one seemed able to really help her. Because Marilyn's problem wasn't just pills. Her problem was constantly having to face her own pain. Method acting had taught her acting, but it hadn't taught her how to forget the pain, and this would eventually destroy her. In the summer of 1962, Marilyn Monroe died. The official report was an overdose of sleeping pills. She was 36 years old. Only 6 years had passed since that victory day at the actor's studio. Lee Strasberg gave a speech at the funeral and cried. Paula Strasberg cried for days. Arthur Miller didn't come to the funeral, but Joe DiMaggio came and continued to send flowers to Marilyn's grave every week for 20 years. Did Marilyn Monroe become a real actress? The answer is yes. Her performances in films like Bus Stop, Some Like It Hot, The Misfits are still appreciated today. Critics took her seriously. She won awards. The method acting Lee Strasberg taught really made Marilyn a great actress, but the price of this success was very heavy, because method acting asked Marilyn to give everything, not just her talent, but her soul too, and in the end Marilyn paid that price. The actor's studio is still active today. Lee Strasberg died a long time ago, but the method acting system is still being taught, and Marilyn Monroe is still remembered as the most famous student of this system. But her story is also a warning, because method acting teaches you great acting, but constantly living the pain can destroy you. Marilyn learned this, and we should learn from her story too. Today, when people say Marilyn Monroe, most still remember that white dress, the blonde hair, that smile, but few people know about her struggle at the actor's studio. Few people know that she worked with Lee Strasberg, learned method acting, didn't have the courage to go on stage 4 times, and finally succeeded. Few people know how Paula Strasberg was a mentor to her, and at the same time a shadow. Few people know that Marilyn gave everything to prove that she wasn't just beautiful, but talented. This story shows you one thing: fame and success don't always bring happiness. Marilyn Monroe was world famous, but unhappy. She had everything, but she had nothing. She wanted to be a real actress, and she became one. But this didn't save her, because Hollywood only valued superficial beauty and didn't want to see the deep talent inside Marilyn. The actor's studio gave her the chance to develop that talent, but it also destroyed her psychologically. And in the end, Marilyn lost the war she won, but her legacy continues. Today, every young actor learns method acting. Today, every actor knows Marilyn Monroe and respects her struggle, because Marilyn wasn't just a Hollywood star, she was also a pioneer. She was one of the first female actors to start her own production company. She was one of the first stars to rebel against the studio system, and she was an artist who gave everything to be taken seriously. This makes her unforgettable. This makes her a legend. If you're going to learn one thing from this story, let it be this: fighting to be real is always the right decision, but don't let that fight destroy you. Marilyn Monroe gave everything to be a real actress, and in the end she lost herself. But her story gives us courage. It shows us that we should pursue our dreams, but we shouldn't lose ourselves. Marilyn couldn't do that, but maybe you can. Maybe by learning from her story, you can write your own story better. And maybe one day, when you go on stage, you'll get applause too, but this time you'll live long enough to hear the applause,